Speaking of Courage podcast, we are back in studio after the Snuffy episode, man.
Yep.
How'd you feel about that one?
It was good, dude. I liked it.
Good, different perspective?
Yep.
All right, man, where are we headed today?
Back to the Pacific. We're sticking with World War II again. A lot of the heroes come out of World War II, so we'll probably be spending a lot of time.
Is that where most
so.
Medal of Honor recipients were from?
Of the 20th century, that's going to be the bulk of them.
Yeah.
So, again, we talked about the Civil War and things like that. World War I had a good amount, but we fought in World War I less than a year. World War II was 4.5 years, and it was substantial fighting. It was the largest scale fighting we've been involved with. So just by nature of that, there was a large number of Medal of Honor.
World War I was only a year?
World War I was 1914 to 1918, but we didn't get involved until 1917. And then by the time we trained the troops up and got everybody over there, we had less than a year of combat.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we
a lot
sat out
of craziness then in a small amount of time, huh?
Yeah, exactly. When you look at the casualty rates and things like that. But if you look at the casualty rates for the European armies that fought in it, it was horrendous, which is why things developed the way they did in World War II.
Interesting.
We've talked about.
So who's our guy today?
All right, so today we're going with Rodger Young, and I think we talked briefly about him, but prior to this, you might not have heard of him. Rodger Young was somewhat famous at the time. During World War II, because they actually wrote a song about him that was a famous war, kind of not a propaganda song, but to boost morale type song.
Famous before? Why would they write a song about him?
Well, we'll get into that, why
cool.
it was specifically about him a little bit later. But have you ever heard any of the old patriotic songs? There's one specifically called Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition.
I don't think so.
It's one of the famous Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition. It's the same guy that wrote that
wrote
this, and that was one
like
of the
morale
big ones.
songs?
Yeah, morale songs. Guys back home to feel like they're in the fight and everything, too, and then to bolster morale overseas.
Okay, so what year's Rodger born?
Rodger Young is born in 1918. He's born in Ohio. Again, a child of the Depression. The Depression didn't start when they were born, but all these kids growing up were kind of in that same area. Young was your typical small town American. He had a good family life, kind of ideal in a lot of ways, but he had a lot of physical problems. So the cards were kind of stacked against Rodger when he was born. He was at the time of his enlistment, he was 5'2", 125 pounds. So he's a real small guy.
Tiny.
Yeah. So he was born with an enlarged heart, which sounds like a good thing. It doesn't sound like it, but I mean, it sounds like, oh, your heart's bigger. But it actually makes it harder to pump blood. So he's got this physical abnormality just growing up. So he's that might account for his small size and things like that.
So they don't have a size requirement?
Well, they do, actually. We'll get into that in a little bit,
okay.
too. They're obviously, the average American was a bit shorter during this time, but 5'2", still substantially small size for a soldier.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And he ended up wanting to join the military.
Of course he did. Yeah. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have these little guys trying to join up and do these heroic things, right?
The psychology of a small guy.
Right. Yeah, you can go one of two ways.
Ass.
You can go Snuffy Smith Napoleon complex, or you can be a guy like Rodger Young.
Okay.
So Rodger grew up in Ohio. He had one of five. There was one sister, and then I think three brothers. He's the oldest. He had good family. They were a musical family. Kind of reminds me of like my grandma on my dad's side. They would play together in the family band. He played a banjo, harmonica.
Like church stuff, or?
Kind of. He went to church intermittently, they said. So okay. I don't think he was overly religious. Just a family band. You know, this country, we have a lot of good musical heritage, especially with that small family band type thing. So he liked to go out and hang out with friends. He had a beat-up car. He'd go with dances, but he spent a lot of time with his family. He was a hunter, a fisherman.
Where's this at?
Ohio.
Okay. He
liked to go bowling with his family. A lot of his letters and stuff are just geared towards that family life and his dad. So you could tell they were real tight, just the way you read the contemporary accounts and things like that. Even though he had that small size, though, he had a good heart. Well, physically, he had a bad heart. But according to everybody that knew him, he was a real good guy. One of his friends later said he was just always happy, and they said he would take a slap in the face and just walk away like nothing happened. Not that anybody was actually slapping him, but he had a good spirit, very respectful to elders, kind of that ideal kind of guy. They said one of the other quotes of him was he would always take the least comfortable chair in the room, meaning he cared enough about people that he wanted them to have the good chairs, right?
That's cool.
So just a good dude. When the Depression hit, his family wasn't torn apart like a lot, fortunately, but they were poor. They were poor, but they were never hungry. His mom actually made their clothes for him. He got a paper route, and he was so good at his paper route that he won awards. He won a trip to Chicago on a bicycle and things like that.
Man.
So the way I kind of picture of him is almost like Rudy.
Yeah.
The Notre Dame player.
Yes.
He's a little guy, but he does the best at everything he can do, right? And like I said, everyone that knew him loved him. He loved kids and he loved dogs. But people that didn't know him didn't even know who he was. Like, it's funny, they said after he earned the Medal of Honor, when they went back to do like interviews in the town, he was so insignificant that people didn't even remember if they knew who he was. And this was this small little town, you know, and they're like, hey, do you remember
just
Rodger growing up?
huh?
And they're like, I think I might have known him, you know, just a little
Not
guy.
somebody that really left a mark.
Exactly. Just spent time with his family, things like that. Like I said, he liked to hunt. He was a good hunter. His nickname was Fuzz because he apparently, when he was little, he shot a rabbit and screamed out, "Look at that Fuzz fly!" So they called him Fuzz as kind of a joke. But he was real into sports. But being 5'2", he wasn't going to do well at sports, right?
Yeah.
But so he tried to play baseball. He had a good arm. He could throw really well and really accurately. He tried to play football, and they laughed at him. He tried to play basketball, and they let him on the team, but just kind of like Rudy, he's playing in the practice games, things like that, right?
Yeah.
He got the chance to play in one of the actual games, and he got fouled real hard. He was playing, someone hit him, it took his legs out completely out from under him, and he came down so hard on his head that he was unconscious, and they had to take him to the hospital.
Damn.
So he was out for hours. They weren't sure if he was going to even survive almost. Like, they don't know what's wrong with
That's
this
a
kid. He's
severe
unconscious.
concussion.
Exactly. He ended up getting neurological damage from it. So
Wow.
his family's looking over him. They're watching him. You know, he finally comes to, and at the time they were like, "Oh, he's okay. He's good to go home." That was in 9th grade in high school. So as soon as he gets home, he starts losing his vision. He can't see and he can't hear. His visual and audio capacity is just diminishing to the point where he has to get these big, thick glasses. So he's already 5'2". Now he can't see. So he goes back to school and he can't hear. So he can't hear the teacher. He can't see anything.
That's all from this fall?
From the neurological damage
Man.
from getting slammed on his head. Imagine being the guy that knocked him on his head.
Yeah.
Right? So it was so severe that he ended up dropping out of school in 10th grade. He couldn't hear the teacher. He couldn't listen. He couldn't stay focused. All from this. And granted, he had pre-existing medical problems they probably didn't know about.
Right.
But he ended up getting to the point where he would have been clinically deaf in today's standards, right? So he drops out of school, and he gets a factory job to help the family. You know, this is 1938-ish, around then.
Yeah.
So he starts working. He's a welder, semi-skilled metal worker, little 5'2" guy. Again, everything he does, he tries to do well. He's an amateur photographer. He still loves his family. He's still doing all these things.
He's still getting after stuff.
He's still getting after it. He's not letting his disabilities get him, but his hearing is bad. So in 1938, he joins the National Guard, partly out of patriotism, partly out of just to get extra money for the family. So you asked about height requirements. Now think about hearing requirements.
Right.
So at the time, the National Guard was much different than the regular Army. Had he tried to join the real Army, they would have laughed him out of there for size, for hearing, for vision, for all those things. But the National Guard was different. The National Guard was your community, right? You go train like once a week. They have lower standards. He's able to either hide his disability or get through, right?
They're going to help you push through, right?
Exactly, and it's kind of like a good old boys club in a sense.
Right.
Like, yeah, you know, here's what's on the hearing test. Get yourself in. So he does, and he ends up joining B Company, 148th Infantry of the 37th Infantry Division, which is the Buckeye Division. So the war starts December 7th, 1941. This is 1938. So we're, early on. War's on the horizon, but at the time, who cares if, you know, you have the guy with bad eyes and bad ears and things like that.
Not worried about it yet.
Not worried about it. No one's really worried about it. And again, it's almost like a social thing. Like, they know everybody. In Company B, there was 7 sets of brothers in this one company of 100 and some guys. And one of them was his brother. Rodger's brother was in the company with him.
Okay.
So you know these guys.
You're working every day?
No.
Just
this is the National Guard. You go once. Now it's once every other week, allegedly. You know, but they were, you know, they would do weekly drill, and then they would have their summer encampments and things like that.
Okay.
But it's this really close environment, and he ends up being a good soldier because he's tough and he fights through everything and he cares about people. Everybody that served with him would mention, like, he got corporal stripes, and instead of being like an asshole or a Napoleon complex, he looked out for the guys. He made sure they had good training, but he cared about them.
That's awesome.
And he was a good shot despite his limited vision and things like that, because he had been growing up doing it. So he would take his time and he would help people and things like that.
So he's already overcoming a lot.
He's an inspiration based on what he's
Just
literally
that, yeah.
like, you can't exaggerate the deafness. I actually found an account on a website that's for the deaf, and they consider him the only deaf Medal of Honor recipient because
Wow.
he would have been legally deaf. But because of the National Guard standards, because he was able to slip through with his buddies, and because he's able to use these other things, he was able to get by, basically, right? I mean, he can hear. He can have a conversation with you, but he can't hear well, right? Which is not a good thing in the Army. In 1940, with war on the horizon, the 37th Infantry Division got federalized, which means they were brought into the regular Army. So you're no longer just these National Guard guys drilling. Now we're getting ready to go to war.
So that's how he was able to get into the Army.
Exactly. Okay. So he sidestepped it. He was kind of grandfather claused in. Had the war started and he'd been drafted or he tried to enlist, there would have been no chance in hell. No chance in hell that he would have been able to even be in the military. But because he was already in, he was able to stay, and they
looked at it like, oh, they've already gone through.
It's already their unit. It's their captains and their colonels and their lieutenant colonels and things like that.
And they like him at this point.
They love him. He's a great leader. And if they don't know about his disabilities, they wouldn't know it by his performance because he takes his test. He does well on his test.
He's not lagging.
He's a good leader. He's not lagging. He's holding his weight on the road marches. Like I said, when you read about him, it's like Rudy. He pushes through on everything he can. Everybody, guys are twice his size are struggling, and he is just trying his hardest and doing everything he can. So he ends up making corporal, which means he's in charge of a couple guys, and then they end up doing 19 months of training. So they're training all over the country. Like you might have caught the pattern with some of these other guys that we've talked about
19
so far.
months, huh?
19 months, yeah. So they end up kind of in the long haul, even though they got federalized.
That's early. A long time, right?
Hell yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long, miserable time. So they're in Mississippi, Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and then they finally get the orders that they're going to go over to the Pacific. So he gets to go on leave, and he spends his whole leave fishing with his dad. That's how much he cares about his family, and
he's not out partying. He's hanging with the family.
Exactly. He's trying to do family things because he's that small town American boy, like we talked about. So they end up getting orders for the Pacific, which at the time was a given in this situation. We've talked about the other ones.
After Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah. So after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese control the Pacific. They have one of the largest square footage empires in history. I mean, most of it's water at this point, but they're steamrolling everybody, right? Until the Navy's finally able to stop them in a couple places. But our first major offensive is going to be Guadalcanal, okay? So the Marines land at Guadalcanal, and they're later supported by the Army. At the time, with the propaganda and stuff, it was, some people looked at the Japanese like they're inferior. They're these little buck-toothed, non-human type things, but they were giving it to us. When we went and fought, the Battle of Guadalcanal was 6 months of fierce jungle fighting. At the end of the battle, there was 1,700 American dead, and there was 24,000 dead Japanese. So
Damn,
like we've talked
dude.
about fighting to the last man, you are fighting to the last man with these Japanese soldiers. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give in, and this is kind of the war that they're going to go into.
Wow, 1,700 to 20-some thousand?
Yeah, 24,000 died because they don't surrender. When it comes time to die, they either bonsai charge or they kill themselves or they just go out fighting. They're not going to surrender, right?
Yeah, every time we talk about the Japanese, it had to be such a scary enemy to face, man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's like fighting somebody that doesn't care about anything and has nothing to lose.
Yeah, if you plan a defense and you're like, well, I'll set up here and then they won't come this way and you set up there, it doesn't work with them. They'll just send 50 people there and, try to get through to you.
If you mow them down,
like
so
if you mow it down, so be it. They died an honorable death, so they're more than happy with that, I guess.
So when does he get there?
So May 24th, 1942, they sail to Fiji. So we talked about it in a couple other episodes, but you can just imagine a guy from Ohio that's never been on a ship before. Now they're on these big troop transport with all these guys stacked 10 high, sleeping in the seasickness and guys throwing up overboard and stuff like that. They end up in Fiji. And again, reading Rodger Young's letters, it's just a big adventure to him. He's just a good-natured, happy kid. He ends up making sergeant, and then he makes staff sergeant, so he's a squad leader now. So he's advancing through because he knows his guys and he cares about his guys, right?
And they care about him.
And they care about him, yeah. But when he's in Fiji, you can just imagine, the war's on the horizon. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know if you're ever going to see your home again. But he's sending letters home talking about how beautiful the moon is over the horizon and look at these natives and stuff like that. And he makes friends with an Australian guy who has a sugar plantation, and he goes and eats dinner with him at the house and stuff. So he's just a real sociable guy. His letters, he writes one letter home talking about his family. At Christmas time, he's saying, I can picture, mom cooking and grandma's over here and dad
right.
sitting at the table. And there's a lot of good in him, and it reminds me of when I was in Iraq during Christmas time and things like that. And
picturing what's going on
at home. And, I remember my brothers, Sean and Chad, for Thanksgiving, they had the table set and then they put a little scarecrow for me with like my picture on it as a joke and stuff, which was funny. But the same kind of thing. All these guys are from the tenements in New York or from the wheat fields, or the farms or the orange groves in California and stuff. And now they're on these tropical islands with these natives, these things they've read about and stuff like that. And they're over there. So to him, it's almost an adventure.
And he's not looking at it like he's living in hell.
He's not looking like he's living in hell. He's doing his best to enjoy it. Everybody says he's cheerful and good natured. And I'm sure he's scared. But he wrote home in one of his letters, "Don't worry, I can run faster than any Jap. I'll be all right as long as I can see the Japs first." Because he knows he's got those vision problems. So he's saying, as long as they don't get the drop on me, I'm okay. Because he's a good rifleman. And he knows that if I see them, I'm fine. But I don't think I'm going to be able to see them. So as long as I can see them first, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of that cockiness. I can run faster than any of them. You're 5'2". You probably can't, at that point.
Yeah.
But they end up moving to Guadalcanal, which has been taken. So they're just getting this jungle training. They're getting used to this environment. And then they end up moving to the Russell Islands for final deployment to New Georgia, which is an island with an airfield that they're going to try to take.
Okay.
So during this time, they're training, they're getting used to the jungle environment. Again, we talked about that heat and humidity. You talk about that grass cutting into your arms. You talk about those long nights and that being tired and things like that and just being miserable. Guys getting sick and guys losing weight. But Young actually gained 13 pounds because one of his friends said he's the only guy he'd ever seen that actually liked Army food and Army eggs. So he's just chowing down to the point where he gains 13 pounds. And that 5'2" guy gaining 13 pounds is pretty good.
That's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of muscle. He's doing good. He gets a hold of a guitar and a harmonica, so he's playing for the other troops and stuff like that.
Damn, so his morale is really good.
He's Rudy, man.
He's he's loving it.
You can't beat this guy down. He's just Rudy. That's the way I look at him. Like I said, just super positive. The guys loved him, and he loved the guys. He cared for his people. That's the biggest thing about him. Not to get poetic, but he was born with an enlarged heart, and he had a big heart his whole life just for everybody that he came in contact with. As they're doing the training, though, he's starting to notice that his hearing's getting worse because he worked in a factory after high school. He's been around all these bombs and the training and the guns and things like that.
Probably affects him worse because he's already started.
Exactly. So his hearing is just getting worse and worse and worse, and he's starting to get worried. So he actually goes there. They get their orders. We're going to the Munda airstrip. We're on the island of New Georgia, which is going to be where this attack is. It's a planned attack, right? He knows that his hearing and his vision might cost people their lives because he's a squad leader. So he goes to his commander and he actually requests to have a demotion to private. He says, "Can you demote me to private?" And what do you think they think? They immediately think he's a coward and he's trying to get out of
is that
combat,
what they
right?
think?
Yeah, they think, okay, Staff Sergeant, you've been having fun in the Army for 2.5 years or 3 years, and now all of a sudden we're getting ready to fight and you don't want to do it. So he tells them, if it means I can't fight with my guys, I'll go back and never say a word about this. But I don't want to be responsible for anyone else's life. I know how bad I'm hearing right now. So they send him to the doctor, the medical aid man, we'll see about this. And when they evaluate him, they go, holy shit, this guy's like almost deaf. So they recommend that he stay in the field hospital and do field hospital work, and he refuses. He says, "I'm going back. I'm going to fight. You're not going to keep me out of this." So they actually granted his wish, and they made him a private, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So in this final push...
So did he go in there, and now his superiors understand that he was telling the truth?
Exactly. So they actually apologized to him and said, "Okay, we're sorry. You can go in as a private, or you can be a private in the unit." And they gave command of his guys to Sergeant Rigby, who was actually a friend of his. So we talked about all the brothers in the unit. His brother was moved to a different unit at this point, but if you join the Army, like when I joined the Army, I was guys with Texas, guys from Georgia, guys from Alabama, guys from California, guys from all over. If we get hit hard and some of us die, there's a family in each of those places that's missing a loved one.
It's not centered somewhere.
But if you get hit and you're in the 37th Infantry Division, right? All these guys they've been training together, they all know each other. They're married to each other's
Same
sisters,
community.
and they're the same cousins. So when they get hit hard. His sergeant now, Rigby, they've known each other since they were little kids. So this isn't just Private Young that's going to maybe get killed. This is Rodger that you grew up with, Fuzz that you've known since you were a little kid. This is all these brothers and all these
It's a bigger
families.
deal to them, yeah.
Right. So when they get hit. These units that have to take it are devastated by these losses. So it's a big deal in this sense, right? Okay, so they end up moving to New Georgia for this fight. When they get there, it's just the war in the Pacific can't be exaggerated enough. It's just awful. You have the enemy who is vicious. They're devastating. They won't give in, and they're violent as hell. Right.
Right.
You have the jungle itself. Guys are suffering from dysentery. There's snakes. There's scorpions. There's leeches. Everyone's terrified. In the daytime, you feel a little confident, but when night falls, that jungle, there's
Comes to life.
sounds and there's things like that. They were saying guys were shooting at crabs because they'd hear these crabs moving and stuff like that. And I have a little combat journal that somebody wrote here, or one of the war correspondents that kind of brings it home. It says, the inexperienced U.S. troops, hungry and tired, began to lose their fire discipline and forward momentum. There was also a high number of severe case of combat stress reaction among U.S. troops during this time. Historian Samuel Morrison described the situation as thus. Darkness came to the jungle like the click of a camera shutter. Then the Japanese crept closer to the American lines. They attacked with blood-curdling screams, plastered bivouacs with artillery and mortar barrages, crawled silently into American foxholes, and stabbed or strangled the occupants. Often they cursed loudly in English, rattled their equipment, named the American commanding officers, and dared the Americans to fight, reminding them they were not in maneuvers now. For sick and hungry soldiers who had fought all day, this unholy chivalry was terrifying. They shot at everything in sight. Foxfire on rotting stumps, land crabs clattering over rocks, even comrades. So again, just that fear, it's,
right.
You can smell the jungle. It's just nasty, rotting. You think of like, oh, we're going to go to Hawaii and stuff like that. It's not the same when you're in a training environment, when you're wet, when you're miserable, when you're hungry. The rotten vegetation is stinking. There's the humidity. There's the darkness. You're hearing these sounds, and again,
your body hurts.
You're from Ohio. You're from
not used to this at
California.
all.
You're not used to any of this. You've read about this and you've seen these kinds of things, but you've never seen it. So as they're moving, there's scorpions, there's rats, there's snakes, there's spiders. People have dysentery. Again, they're just shitting their pants as they're walking and stuff like that. It's just pure misery, even without the enemy. And then you have the enemy on top of that.
And the enemy was just way more used to this?
Yeah, and they were they lived a different lifestyle. That's the Japanese can live on a sock full of rice for a week, and we have to eat our regular foods and stuff like that. But we're trying to come home. They're not. They don't care if they live or die, right?
Yeah, it's a different mentality.
Said, it's that psychological warfare, like the guy's saying. They're waiting for night to sneak into these guys' foxholes and stab them and strangle them. So these kids, they're kids. They were literally in high school 2 years before this, dancing at sock hops or however we want to think of it. And now you're waking up to go relieve your buddy and you find him with his fucking tongue cut out in his trench or something like that. That's terrifying. And the Japanese calling out to you and stuff like that. Hey, Americans, just trying to terrify you, and it does.
And so they thrive at night?
Yeah, they always thrive at night. At the enemy, we own the day, they own the night. That's usually how it works. Because it's easier for smaller forces to maneuver and move at night. And it takes away a lot of our technological advances just with darkness. Even today, even with all the stuff we have like that. So just moving's difficult, right? The rain and the humidity and things like that. You're moving into these places. You're going across these streams. The streams are swollen, so you're having to swim across and keep your rifle up over the air to try to not, ruin your rifle and stuff like that. This is where your
focus is on everything but the enemy.
Exactly.
And you still have the enemy.
You're dragging your gear behind you and stuff. But this is like you have a machete to chop through the jungle to even get anywhere. But we need to take this airstrip. We need to take the Moonday airstrip so we can use it for ours to advance forward and things like that. So Young and his guys, they're on a 20-man patrol. But like I said, it doesn't take a whole Japanese force to pin down guys or to hold down guys. They'll go on patrol and you get shot by a sniper, and then what do? You shoot back, you pin them down, you try to do anything, and then they just move away. It's draining psychologically. And then you have to get your body back, right? If you get killed on patrol, we got to get you back. Again, you see the movies, you pick them up, throw them off your shoulders, run back. We're talking miles back. We're talking, through those same streams you came over, those hacking
with
the jungles.
The enemy still on you.
So they're putting guys in ponchos, making like field litters out and having to carry them back. So we talked about it's the National Guard. You and I, imagine if I died and you had to carry me in a poncho back with 4 other guys, which takes 4 people out of the fight because you're slugging them over, bringing them back to the lines. Imagine how that would feel for your actual morale. Imagine how that's going to wear on you. You know what I mean?
Brutal.
When I was in Iraq, we there was two locals that were killed, and they tied them to like a barge, and they were in the river, and we had to pull their bodies out of the river. And when we pulled them out, they had been deteriorated some from the water because they're water bodies. But we had actually had a body bag. We put them in the body bag, but we had to climb up this hill with them, and I was at the back, and the other guys were in the front, and the whole body just slipped down into the sack. And not to be grotesque, but it was not a body anymore. It was just like sludge, and it was this weird mix of separating yourself, like this isn't even a person, this feels like a pile of sludge, versus the reality of this is a human being, somebody loved this person, and now they're just a slump in a sack. And now imagine that times the Pacific, times all these guys that are dying, and it's your buddy or your cousin maybe, or a family friend or something like that. And not to mention, again, the Japanese dead were just left along the trails and things like that. So
they're rotting everywhere.
Yeah, so you're quickly in this strange environment, and you're realizing how little life means out there, right? If you get shot by a sniper, your buddies are gonna cry about it, and they're gonna be, they're gonna miss you for the rest of your life. But you're just a line on a number on a sheet and an army ledger somewhere at that point, because those are acceptable losses, and you're just gonna move on. And it's that grinding war of attrition. And this is early in the war, but you're gonna learn what your life does and doesn't mean. And if they send you guys out to go on patrol and you get shot there, the Army's okay with that, or the Marines are okay with that, or whatever that may be,
Something we expected.
Exactly.
Man. Yeah, and taking your buddies, carrying them face to face or back, you know what I mean? Just throwing them over your shoulder like that. Right. That's horrific. That would be horrific that'd be like a life-changing thing for any person now.
And a lot of these guys did this often. It's not like everybody had their best friend die in their arms, but everybody saw somebody die, or they saw the dead, or they're just around them, or they're seeing them. You get the bodies back, and it's not like they dress the bodies in a funeral home. Sometimes they get stacked like cordwood. Sometimes they're put in certain places. We talked about it in the Lara episode in Italy, how they'd bring the dead down on mules and kind of just lay them out and stuff like that. If you don't detach yourself, you're going to lose your mind. So it's plays on your mind quite a bit.
That's interesting, man. It's a lot to deal with for young kids.
5'2", Rodger Young.
120 pounds. Well, 133 at this point.
Right. Yeah, there you go. He gained a little bit of weight. So he's about 25 years old at the time. So he's a little older than some of the others, as a lot of the National Guard guys are. But on July 31st, 1943, he's part of a 20-man patrol. They're basically reconnaissance. They're going to try to kind of scout out the enemy in the area, see what kind of capabilities they have, et cetera. So they're moving along this trail, which they probably shouldn't be on a trail, but they said it was overgrown, so they didn't think the Japanese were using it. As they're moving back, they get attacked by a machine gun, as is always the case, right? The Japanese set up a pillbox, they wait, and they have their coconut logs or their bamboo logs or whatever they are, so they have a good fixed fortification, small, kind of a hasty one, but it's a 5-man machine gun crew, and the Americans can't see them. The jungle's so dark, it's late afternoon, it's not nightfall yet, but the jungle's so dark that you just hear the gunfire and then you see men go down. So as this 20-man patrol is moving, they get ambushed. The machine gun opens up, pop, 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 pop. 2 men go down immediately. So everybody gets down, everybody gets as low as they can to the ground, trying to figure out where this is coming from, right? Trying to figure out what's going on, how do we get out of here? So the sergeant says, okay, we need to react to contact like you always do. We're going to pin down fire. We're going to try to flank. He's only got 18 guys now. So they get up, they start to move, and 2 more get cut down immediately. Pop, 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 pop. So now you have 16 guys, and there's 4 dead. We got to get these 4
And these are all
back,
from that
right?
particular
these
company?
These are all from the same company that's been training together for years.
So you just lost 4 of your friends.
Exactly. These guys. Even if you weren't in the unit back in Ohio, you've been training with them.
Is there a panic that sets in during that, too, where it's like, who is it?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
So there's going to be, Audie Murphy, we talk about him a lot. He talked about it. If they must die, let them die face down, so I don't have to know their names, And they would talk about a lot of the guys that were veterans. They wouldn't get to know the new guys because they didn't want to know them because it's too painful to see your friends die, right? So, if there's only 20 of you and you all know each other and you're hearing bodies go down or you're seeing bodies go down.
Are you doing like roll calls?
You would think so. Who was over there? Who was, again, not in...
Just going down the list of names, like
right.
to hear who calls back?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want to be calling out right now. But again, not super Iraq story day. But when I was in Iraq, when our Bradley got hit, we got dropped off. When we got ambushed, we got dropped off, and it was my roommate, one of my best friends, Davis, was driving the Bradley, and we pushed in to try to go find where the enemy was. We're hearing fire, so we're moving towards it. And then when we turn around, there's a huge explosion and the Bradley's on fire. And the first thing I thought was Davis. Davis is in the Bradley. I got to get Davis out, because it's not a piece of equipment in an American soldier. That's my friend. That's my roommate that we fight with, that we eat pizza together, that we do all these things, that we drive to Austin. That's my buddy Davis, right? And that's what it becomes about at that point. It's what would you do if you had to watch your friend die out here on the street?
Exactly.
Right? Now make
you just
that...
don't, like you said about the line on a sheet.
Right.
I don't think people that haven't been in the military don't. That's the part that is the disconnect, I think. Like you just said, you hear, Humvee got hit and people died.
Yeah.
It doesn't hit you.
It's just, it becomes lines on a news report and not human beings. But somebody loves everybody, even if they're a degenerate piece of shit.
Yeah.
They got a mom or somebody that's
Snuffy had people that cared.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I'm just kidding.
Okay,
so anyways, the sergeant recognizes
down.
We can't take this machine gun. It's too high. They have the high ground. They have a covered and concealed position. They have bamboo logs. We're going to get eaten up. So he yells, we need to withdraw. We need to withdraw because it's late afternoon. If it gets to nighttime, they're screwed. That Japanese machine gun can hold them in that position until nightfall, right? If it just, every time they move,
they'll get snuck up on?
At nightfall, the enemy owns the ground. So they're going to come through and they're going to get picked off one by one and they're going to be devastated, right? They're too far from friendly lines. No one even knows they're being attacked. So whoever's in charge orders, we need to retreat, fall back, organized withdrawal, right? So they start calling it down the line, retreat, fall back. You don't want to let the enemy know, but they're making sure, you're glued to the ground, the sweat's dripping off your face, you're digging in with your hands, you got your rifle up, you're looking around, you're trying to think where the enemy is, but you're telling, thank God we can leave. But if you leave, we've talked about this before, you're showing your back to the enemy. If you show your back to the enemy, you're not in a position to defend yourself to fight, right?
Yeah.
So you would do it where you would bound, kind of cover fire for each other, but if you don't know where the enemy is, you're not really going to be able to do this well. So the guy that's next to Young, they know he can't hear well, so he actually hits him with a stick, and he tells him, hey, it's time to go back, right? So Stanley Frankel, who was a commander of the 37th, or one of the commanders in the 37th, later wrote an account of this, and he said that they all start to try to fall back, but Rodger Young refuses. And he calls out, I see him. I can see the enemy, right? I see the gun. And remember, he talked about earlier, I'll be fine as long as I can see him.
Yeah.
So according to Frankel, he starts crawling forward, and the lieutenant yells to him. Young crawls past the lieutenant. The lieutenant goes to grab him, and he misses his leg, and he yells at him. He says, come back here. It's suicide. Come back. That's an order. And Young turns to him, and according to Frankel, he smiled, and he said, I'm sorry, sir, but I don't hear very well. And then
awesome.
He keeps crawling forward, right? The Japanese see movement. So Young gets a little bit ways forward, and the Japanese open up with a machine gun as Rodger tries to fire, and they stitch him up, basically. They shoot him in the shoulder, they shoot him in the left arm, and they shatter his rifle. So this 5'2" guy with the enlarged heart, that's been physically incapable his whole life due to his disabilities, he's now shot in the shoulder and the arm, and he has no rifle. He's too far away from his guys. They said he flinched, but he didn't stop. So even though he just got stitched up by a machine gun, he keeps crawling. He keeps crawling forward, and the guys see what he's doing, and they're going, oh, fuck, that's Rodger, right? So they start firing at the enemy, but they don't know where they are. So they're just blindly firing into the jungle. So the Japanese are experienced. It's not going to put them down if they're not taking the actual rounds. So Young tries to crawl as he can, and you think of an army crawl, everybody does this. A real army low crawl, your face is in the ground, like you're dragging mud. So he's as low as he can to the ground, but he's bleeding. His shoulder's throbbing. He doesn't know how bad he is. We don't know how bad he is because we don't know where those rounds went in.
Yeah.
From an elevated position. It's not, I got shot in the shoulder. It's, okay, where did that round go in? Did it go to my ribs? Did it go to my lungs? Did it go to what? But Young is Rudy. So Young's not stopping. Young keeps crawling forward. His rifle's broke. All he has is the hand grenades on his belt. He crawls, and they fire again. They stitch him up again. He gets shot in the hip. He gets shot in the thigh. He gets shot in the leg. So everybody sees him, and now, they're starting to be able to fall back because now the Japanese are forcing their fire on Young. So this is the time for them to get away. Young doesn't stop. He starts crawling again, and he actually crawls so close that he gets within 5 yards of the enemy, right? So there's a little, what we call defilade. So he's in a little shallow divot, and like we talked about with those tripods and with the bamboo logs and things like that, the Japanese can't shoot him because he's too low. So he's stuck there, and one of the soldiers later said, it happened in a very critical moment, and if that bit of strategy had failed, we would have all been sunk, because he knows that the Japanese would have been able to cut them apart if they hadn't focused their attention on Rodger, right? And he was 75 yards away from the gun, but he crawled within 5 yards of this thing. So his guys are watching him, and the lieutenant that's in charge, these are his guys. He's already lost 4 people. He's going to have that on his conscience for the rest of his life. And he's seeing Young crawling forward. He's seeing him bleeding. How is this guy even moving? So he yells at him. He says, "For God's sake, Young, stay where you are. We'll get to you somehow." He knows that they're not going to be able to do this easy, but just for God's sake, Young, stay down.
Just stop.
Just stay down. But Young refuses. At this point, he probably couldn't hear him anyways, being 75 yards away and with his hearing. But he reaches down on his waist. His left arm shattered. His right arm, he's in pain from multiple rounds. He's in pain from crawling across. A 75-yard crawl isn't easy, but he reaches for his grenades, and he starts pulling the grenades off of his belt, right? Everything he's doing is a moment of pain at this time, but the Japanese can't hit him where he's laying, but he can't hit them either. So he stands up and he throws his grenades in the hole. And as he does so, they open fire and they shoot him in the face. And he takes the full force of the machine gun blast in his face. It shatters his glasses and he falls to the ground dead. Fortunately, he was able to get his grenades off before they shot him, and his grenades were able to kill all 5 of the Japanese soldiers in that machine gun position. So he fell with rounds to the face, rounds to the hip, rounds to the leg, rounds to the shoulder, but he was able to save his guys. So
damn. So he knew he was going to die.
He knew he was going to die. It was a suicide mission, and he knew it. And we'll never know what he was thinking, but there's no way he thought he was coming back from that one. Because the enemy was still controlling the area, they were still controlling the night, they had to leave his body there. So they grabbed their 4 bodies they had, and they were able to fall back to friendly lines. Young's crippled, shattered body laid next to that smoking machine gun. You can see with the dead Japanese in the jungle. The next day, they were able to go back, and they were able to give him a funeral ceremony. They actually buried him right where they found his body. And they put a simple wooden cross, as the song says, with his helmet on top to remember him. And they had to get out of there quick because they knew, again, if nightfall came, that the Japanese would be in the area. So 2 weeks later, they ended up retaking we finished taking the island, and they ended up having a more formal ceremony for him. But one of the things they never mentioned, but one of the things that I was curious about is they're able to bring these 4 bodies in the poncho, and they buried him where he laid. I imagine that was because of the physical state of his body.
Yeah.
If you imagine a night in the jungle and that, what it would do to somebody and the bugs and the insects and the things like that, and he's got multiple rounds in his face and his things, I bet that he was just so bad that they buried him where he was.
Yeah.
So, these
Not
guys that he
back.
physically, saved these guys, and they having to leave his body there in the jungle.
Dang.
But again, it's not... He didn't kill 50 people. He didn't kill 100 people, but he voluntarily gave his life so that these other guys could escape.
Yeah.
Right? So as a result of his actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. They gave it to his mother. She ended up writing to the Army. When they wrote and told her what happened, she said, "We want to put up a plaque in our hometown. Can he be a staff sergeant again?" He was really proud to have been a staff sergeant. And the commander asked if he could, and the Army said, "Nope. He was a private when he died. He's going to be a private," right? So the guy had to write back, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your wonderful son will have to remain a private for the time being." But that ended up being fortuitous, because when the Army was looking to write a ballad of a soldier, they wanted a ballad of a private in the infantry. So they ended up, had he been a sergeant or a staff sergeant when he died, he never would have got the glory or the fame from that. But because they had kept him as a private, they ended up, I think his name was Frank Loesser or Lesser, was looking through the Medal of Honor citations, and when he found him, he wrote the Ballad of Rodger Young, which is what became famous there. So
Damn.
And some of the lines from that: "Caught in ambush lay a company of riflemen, just grenades against the machine guns in the gloom. Caught in ambush until this one of 20 riflemen volunteered to meet his doom. Volunteered, Rodger Young, fought and died for the men he marched among. In the everlasting annals of the infantry glows the last deed of Private Rodger Young." And that's his everlasting glory. And
Yeah.
I've had that song stuck in my head for all day, obviously.
Yeah.
And, many weeks before that, but...
That's crazy.
Yeah,
man.
so they actually, in 1949, his mom requested, and they actually recovered his body, exhumed it, and brought his body back home. So he's now in the U.S. But again, he was 25 years old when he died. And again, just that goodness of the heart in him. When they mailed his belongings back, his belongings were a Japanese compass, some seashells, a sailor hat. It's almost like a little kid, you know, on an adventure or something like that. But when it came time, when those guys were pinned down, when your friends were dying, again, because he lost 4 friends before he died too, there was They could have fell back. They could have got out of there, but it wouldn't have been all of them. Maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 more of them would have got cut down. He had no business being in the Army. He was 4F times 1,000. He should never have been in the Army.
Yeah.
He had every right to stay down. He had every right to fall back. He wasn't a squad leader anymore, but he wouldn't stay down after being shot. He wouldn't stay down after being shot again, and he wouldn't stay down after he was wounded and he got close to
What
the
do you
gun.
think the thinking was?
I think he cared about people. I think Young is the epitome of a soldier who cares about his troops, a soldier who recognizes that
This is my duty.
This is my duty.
No one's going to do it. I'm going to do it.
If not me, then who? If not now, then when? Yeah, I think he thought, I can see him. They can't see him. I got to do something. I'm a good shot with my rifle. I can take him out. Okay, I'm hit. There goes my rifle. Okay, I can throw.
I'm going to die anyway.
I can throw. Yeah, there's still, if there was any part of Young's body that could move forward, that part of that body would have moved forward until he could have. And he did exactly what he needed to do. And these are those smaller scale actions that happened all over on all these places in the map that no one has ever heard of or never would have if it wasn't for the war. But in that moment, this 5'2" guy was able to be the biggest man, there, and he was able to save these other guys. So before we forget, I'm going to go ahead and read a citation as well,
please.
okay? All right, so in action at New Georgia, Solomon Islands, on 31 July 1943, the infantry company, of which Private Young was a member, was ordered to make a limited withdrawal from the battle line in order to adjust the battalion's position for the night. At this time, Private Young's platoon was engaged with the enemy in a dense jungle where observation was very limited. The platoon suddenly was pinned down by intense fire from a Japanese machine gun concealed on a higher ground only 75 yards away. The initial burst wounded Private Young. As the platoon started to obey orders to withdraw, Young called out that he could see the enemy emplacement, whereupon he started creeping towards it. Another burst from the machine gun wounded him a second time. Despite his wounds, he continued his heroic advance, attracting enemy fire, answering with rifle fire. When he was close enough to his objective, he began throwing hand grenades, and while doing so was hit again and killed. Private Young's bold action, in closing with this Japanese pillbox and thus diverting its fire, permitted his platoon to disengage itself without loss and was responsible for several enemy casualties.
Damn.
So as we often say, everyone that every son and daughter that was born from those men that were there owes their life to Rodger Young, and every man and woman that descends from the troops that were on New Georgia, that the end was hastened by that one action because things are domino effects in that sense. Owes their life in a sense back to Rodger Young.
These are those butterfly effect moments. Those, like,
exactly.
Really severe consequence ones.
Exactly.
Man. You just think about what was he thinking. You know what I mean?
I feel like
I wonder after he gets hit
him
twice if he goes, I'm not going to survive this anyway, so let's go.
It definitely could have been, especially when he was within 5 feet of the grenade. He might have literally been, or 5 yards, he literally might have felt the life oozing out of him. He might have felt,
a few more minutes.
Every breath is labored. Every time he breathes in, he might see, fucking blood spewing out. He might I'm losing all feeling in my legs. I don't have much time left. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. And I just,
what an awesome
the visualization
way to go.
of him just, he's not stupid. He knew if he raised up, he was going to get hit, but he didn't care. Hey, this is it. Let's go. Pulled the pins. He's in the act of throwing them, and just that machine gun fire catching him in the face. He was dead before.
Fast.
He was dead as soon as he started crawling, and he knew it, but he had a mission to complete, so he decided he was going to wait to die.
I love the mentality, and I just wonder what they're thinking.
Yeah, and again, when you read his letters and you read the accounts of the guys that did know him, there's not a single one of them that would ever describe him as a badass or a tough guy. They say the words they used to describe him or the phrases, he would take the least comfortable chair in a room.
That's very much what he did.
And exactly.
With his action.
And if you slapped him in the face, he'd just shrug it off and forget about it. He just didn't
Reminds
care.
me of Villegas' action.
A little bit.
Just let's go.
Yeah, they charging forward and then hit, and then charging forward and then hit, and then, all right, there's nothing left but me and my grenades, just grenades against machine gun in the gloom, as the song says. And I'm sure you'll play some of the song on here if you can, but it's just such a cool song, and it came to embody everybody, everybody in the infantry, all these guys that are fighting, all these mothers whose sons are away and things like that. And this was the end of the war when this was written, but you can just picture them, and the opening lines. They've got no time for glory in the infantry. They've got no use for praise is loudly sung. It's like they're not here for the glory. They don't give a shit. They're not trying to be flashy. They're fighting, and that's all they've got to do right now.
So where's he buried?
Back in Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah, he's
celebrated.
Oh yeah, he's well known. Like I said, at the time he was when the song came out, everybody would be singing it like, your top 40 hit. So people knew his name. I think there's a stadium or something named after
him. That's before, like that was after his action.
After his action,
okay,
obviously.
Cool.
Yeah. It's about his death and things like that. But he, not as well known today, but like you said, in Starship Troopers, how the ship's named after him and things like that. So there's really these odd little bits that you might have heard the name, or if you've ever just heard the song in passing or things like that. It goes back to this guy, and it didn't have to be Rodger Young. It could have been any of these other nameless, faceless infantrymen who were killed long before they should have, expired in this life. Guys that died at 18, 19, 20. Guys that died on mountaintops in Italy. Guys that, died in jungles and in these little islands that no one could pronounce. Guys that died on the sand in Iwo Jima. Guys that died on the beach of France. All these guys. Not all of them earned the Medal of Honor or died heroically, but they all gave their lives, the last full measure of devotion for their country and their friends or whatever that may be. Man. So...
Yeah, when we visited the Medal of Honor Memorial, you look at that wall, and it's just names and names and names, and you're like, dang, every name has a story like that. It's crazy. Yep. And those are just the
Medal of Honor recipients.
Right.
Yeah, that's the top of the top.
It's almost like if you could click each name and just see it, It's amazing. Good story, man. Yeah. All right, guys. Questions, comments, concerns in the comment section. Let us know if you have any questions or anything like that. What else you got, man?
Yeah, any episode suggestions, if there's anyone you want to hear. David Wheelwright, thanks for listening. He had a couple suggestions. I'll try to get on those when I get some more
Eugene
info.
Glaudeman, thanks for listening. Shad.
Rick Knight, Sean. Everybody.
Yeah. I had something else I was going to say, but I forgot, man.
It's the flies.
Oh, intro song. We're trying to find a good intro song for the show, so if anybody knows any musicians, guitar, we want something that is what would you be looking for in an intro?
That's on you, man. I don't know what you're looking for.
Come on, what would you be looking for?
I don't know. Something simple.
Something simple, old school, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening.
Later, guys.
But in every soldier's heart, in all the infantry, shines the name of Rodger Young. Shines the name, Rodger Young, fought and died for the men he marched among. To the everlasting glory of the infantry lives the story of Private Rodger Young. Caught in ambush lay a company of riflemen.